Thank you, good afternoon. It's great to be back in this fantastic city of Tbilisi. It is, I think, the 7th time I've been back here, and I've been here in 3 identities. I first came as a military officer, I then came as a marketing professional, and now I work for a leadership and advisory company run by a great man, General Stanley McChrystal. He's a fantastic leader, and he's also a fantastic author. And last year, he wrote a book called Leaders, Myth and Reality, in which he tried to take some of the lessons that have been learned from leaders in the past and project that leadership and the skills of that leadership through into the 21st century to find out how leadership changed. And he used the mantle, leadership is not what you thought it was, not what you thought it is, and it never was. And that got me thinking, as I was going around bookstores trying to encourage bookstores to sell this book, about the nature of myth. And it made me think, actually, that we are more susceptible to myth and mythology in the 21st century than we ever were in mythological times. If you don't believe me, look at this. This is the O2 Arena. It is one of London's most famous landmarks. It's a concert hall. It was originally called the Millennium Dome, opened on the 1st of January in the year 2000. It's a really scientific structure. Its diameter, it's a circle, it has a diameter of 365 meters, representing each day of the year. It has a height of 52 meters, representing each week of the year. And the 12 pylons you see around the top represent the points of the clock and the months of the year as well. In many ways, it represents everything we have technically learned in humankind. But its purpose was to commemorate a 2,000-year anniversary of a story for which, whichever what we believe, there is still no tangible scientific proof. And in many ways, it's therefore like another famous landmark in the UK, Stonehenge. And this suggests to me that throughout our evolution, we have always leveraged the greatest levels of technology, creativity, and intellect to build structures that connect us to things we don't understand. We have tried to make the unbelievable unignorable. And that's what these monuments do. And there's a very good reason for this. We have a connection to myth that goes right back to our DNA. In his book *Sapiens*, Yuval Noah Harari tells us that mythology was necessary for us to spread across the globe, because it's impossible to motivate groups of 10 or more people unless you can give them something common to believe in. And as the group gets larger, the chances of them being able to actually see something to believe in, it gets less and less. So we develop myths, something that will give us a common purpose to understand, to get more complex things done. This was called the first cognitive revolution, and it was the dawn of myth, if you like, the dawn of being able to talk about something or someone that wasn't in the room. It's actually the dawn of gossip, and it's also the dawn of fake news. All those things we think are 21st century concepts have been hardwired to our emotional architecture since the very ancient times. And since then, we've been using mythology to provide social structure throughout evolution. You have a great example here in Georgia. Everybody knows that wine was created in Georgia. And everybody here knows that it was created by God. And that was so that the people, good people of Georgia, would be able to take a holiday from the trials and tribulations of life on earth and experience what it would be like to live in heaven for a short while. And the devil got very, very jealous of this. And so he invented a brand competitor called ChaCha. And there was a brand war that then went on between heaven and hell. And it was won eventually by God with a killer advertising slogan, who said, you probably know the story. He said, after the 3rd glass of ChaCha, the people still belong to me. After the 4th glass, the devil can take them. And so you see, it's a great myth, but it's actually got a very good social purpose. If you drink too much ChaCha, you're going straight to hell. Here's another great example. This is a statue called the Bocca della Verita. It stands in the Portico Santa Maria in the Cosmedin Church in Rome, and it dates from Roman times. The title literally translates as the mouth of truth. And the legend goes, if you put your hand in the mouth of the statue, you cannot tell a lie. This was very, very useful for Roman women who were accused of infidelity by their husbands. They would take their husbands to the Bocca della Verita, they would place their hands in the mouth of truth, swear undying love to their husbands, swoon blissfully, and be immediately forgiven. But there's another really mundane explanation, a suggested explanation for this structure. It's because it's round and it has holes in it, it was nothing more than a very ornate drain cover. But that's not nearly exciting, right? So we always go to the myth. And as we go through history, women actually appear in mythology more and more, which is really unfair. And in the Middle Ages, they get a really rough time because we used witchcraft to identify and personify the evil that we couldn't understand in societies, and societies' leaders were largely men. So it was really good to look at women as witches, right? And so the stuff that we don't understand, we find something we can tangibly go after because we just don't understand it. So we've been replacing certainty with myth to provide certainty where uncertainty doesn't exist in the past. Now, that's not to say we haven't tried to debunk myth, as we've developed science throughout hundreds of years, and you've heard some fantastic scientific descriptions today. When we developed the evolution of modern medicine, manned flight, the telephone, all of those things would have been considered witchcraft, not 200, 300 years before. But it's really important to go to the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, when science really changed our lifestyles, the way we actually view our human life and how we create wealth, which was the second revolution I want to talk about, and that's the Industrial Revolution. Here, we codified production lines. We gave people and parts specific things to do to create certainty. And it developed a whole movement called the efficiency movement, which was headed up by this man, Frederick Winslow Taylor. He wrote a book called The Principles of Scientific Management at the end of the last century, at the beginning of the last century. And that really stuck. He codified everything about the production process, the calibration of tools, how long people worked, how far they could reach. It dehumanized everything about industrial production. And it really stuck. It not only changed the way we produce things, but it changed the way in which we organized the companies and the organizations that were producing all these wonderful things from the Industrial Revolution. And this still exists today. This is over 100 years old, and probably lots of people in here work in organizations that look a little bit like this, don't you? But then the third revolution happened. And that was at the end of the 20th century, the information revolution. And the networks and the interconnectivity that created across the world provided people to have agility in organizations, in their network structures, that can really challenge the hierarchical systems of the Industrial Revolution. And that made a real conflict in life as well. And here's the thing, the technology that started in the information revolution hasn't stopped. It's keeping accelerating. If you think about artificial intelligence, for example, progression is being made faster and faster and faster. And as that progression exponentially increases, we as humans are really struggling to keep up. My kids, by the way, are doing a lot better than I am, but we are struggling as humans to keep up. But here's the really interesting thing. Those organizations that I showed you haven't hardly changed in one little bit. And in this networked world, hierarchical organizations are not surviving. And the average life of a Fortune 500 company in America, for example, has decreased to a third of what it used to be in recent years. And it's worth bearing in mind. Let's have a look at the way information behaves in the new environment. This is a thing called the Gartner hype cycle. It was developed by the IT consultancy Gartner to measure how the impact of a certain piece of technology would hit the market. Initially, the iPhone, for example, comes out and reaches a peak of inflated expectation. This is the best phone you've ever seen in the world. It's got a great camera, buy it. And then very soon afterwards, it's taken down by reviewers who say, no, it breaks in your back pocket. And it reaches what they call a trough of disillusionment. And eventually, people write articles about it, product tests, and it eventually reaches a plateau of productivity. It's exactly the same way as communication now behaves as well. We reach hype, then we take down information, and then eventually we find the truth. It's also a really good way, by the way, of thinking about TED Talks. It's about 5 minutes ago, you were all at a peak of inflated expectation. You may be down here now in a trough of disillusionment. I promise I will try and get you up to the other end of that thing by the end. So You need to know this because the hype that is initially created around an issue now might not contain the truth, but it is so much more important than what happens afterwards because we judge belief in time and not just in its quality. So let's have a look at the way we've communicated throughout the ages. We started off communicating in symbols, and then we managed to morph that into script. So we could write things down, and it was a much more efficient way of doing that. We then put that into typeset so we could mass produce our script and get our communications message everywhere it needed to go. That led to the creation of data, and data enabled us to develop much more imaginative ways to communicate with each other, and that enabled us also to use pictures so that we could communicate with each other much faster than it would take to use text. So look how far we have come in 2,000 years. Does anyone see a similarity here? And this is interesting, isn't it? Because the visual myth is still really, really important to us. And we use technology, social media now to create myths about ourselves all the time. We're doing it probably now, I don't know. Think of the last time you have a friend who uses LinkedIn who said, I am honored and humbled to be doing something, giving a TEDx talk in Tbilisi, for example. I'm so honored, I'm so humbled. So humbled, in fact, I want to tell the whole world about it, right? So it creates bad behavior. We create myth about ourselves. So consider defriending some of these people. They're not good for your mental health. The other thing is we follow brands, don't we? We've always followed brands throughout the 20th century. They're not real. You can't touch Nike. You can't touch McChrystal Group. You can't touch any of the companies that we work for, and yet they are absolutely how we define ourselves when we talk to people about what we do. And they convince us to do all kinds of things, buy shoes. And if you look at politics now, politics is probably more centered in mythology than it ever has been. I mean, we've just had an election in the UK. I'm dreading going back and seeing the results of that, but never mind. But look at these two pictures. You've probably seen these two pictures before. They often appear together, all right? Because there was a survey done on the second inauguration day in January 2017 by a professor from University of Massachusetts called Brian Schaffner. And he said, he got a sample of 1,400 people, divided them in two, and he asked the first half of those people, he said, which inauguration is which? They didn't have the labels on. Which inauguration is Obama's and which is Trump? 41% of Trump voters got that question wrong. Okay, 8% of Clinton voters got that wrong, and 22% got it wrong of the people that didn't vote at all. Now that shows there was hype and there was doubt around these two pictures, and people were actively going away from logic. But he asked the second group, which picture has more people in it? 15% of Trump voters got that wrong. 3% of Clinton voters and 2% of people who didn't vote got that wrong as well. This doesn't prove anything about the intellectual capability of Democratic and Republican voters in the States. Okay, what it proves is people will actively dump logic when they are faced with a mythological fact, with a mythological representation, even when it's staring them right in the face. So what does that mean about leadership? Well, I'm afraid the days of the great leaders, in case you haven't noticed, may have ended. Leadership, we used to think, as the business of leaders, the focus was always on the leader. And it was the leader who imparted leadership upon followers within context to achieve results. And the results would be how that leader was judged. And that circle went all the way through the 20th century. It was the age of the great leaders. Now where we live is the age of the great audience. And leadership has to change. We shouldn't be looking to focus on leaders anymore. Leadership is something that happens at the intersection of leaders, followers, and context. And this is what my boss, Dan McChrystal, has written in his book. Because all those three elements can change in the modern information world, and they can change extremely quickly. And that not only means we've got to think about leadership differently, we've got to think about strategy differently. You know, we all know what smart goal setting is, right? Smart goal setting we've always had before, which is to make a goal specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. Okay, and that was when the age of the great leaders would produce their objectives and they'd expect them just to be carried out. The age when they were broadcasting to an audience. But what's that like in the age of the great audience? We have to redefine this. We have to make our objectives, first of all, simple. Simple enough for the audience to understand, brutally simple. McChrystal Saatchi, head of the world's largest independent communications network, has a triad. He says, "It is easier to complicate than simplify. Simple ideas enter the brain quicker and stay there longer. Brutal simplicity of thought is therefore a painful necessity." We must make them meaningful to the audience. There's no sense in just communicating in metrics the audience doesn't understand. You've got to have the audience's metrics in your own mind. They must be appropriate to the cultural norms of that audience, so that you can persuade people, you can influence people to do the right thing. Reasonable within the expectations of that audience. And finally, yes, time-based, but trackable by the audience. Those are really important. This is what I see as the new version of smart objective setting in the audience-based society. If we get that right, we can still do wonderful things with myth. There are 160,000 homeless people in the Greater Toronto area, which is terrible. How do you create a myth to raise awareness of that issue? Well, one company has done it like this. This is a virtual representation of the building it would take to house all of those 160,000 people appearing on the Toronto skyline. It's pretty dramatic, it's simple, it's meaningful, it's appropriate, and it's reasonable. They've gone on to make an app that you can use to scan the Toronto skyline, and it appears as you drift past it. It's really making awareness. It's making the unbelievable unignorable. And the campaign is called the Unignorable Tower. It's a great campaign. So listen, mythology is back. The level of complexity we face is unendurable. We cannot face it without creating myths. But actually, mythology never went away. We were always hardwired to mythology to connect to those things that make us scared or joyful or just illogical sometimes. It's part of our being, and we can't get away from it. And finally, success will not now be judged in how much can be proved or disproved, but in the way in which we adapt to the many faces of myth and create influence in the audiences we need to make impact on. Back to that story about selling books. This is the book I was trying to sell, Leaders, Myth and Reality. In the very last bookstore I went into, it's King's Cross Station, I went in and asked the shop seller, "Do you have a copy of Leaders, Myth and Reality by General Stan McChrystal?" And she looked on her computer and said, "Oh, so we're getting one copy in on Monday. And if that sells, then we might order some more." So being a dutiful employee, I leaned across the table and said, "I really think you should order some more copies." And in the greatest myth that's ever happened to me, she came back and said, "Are you Stan McChrystal?" I'm very sorry I haven't been Stan McChrystal, but it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.